Gavin said it with a mouth full of roast chicken and red wine, sitting in my dead wife's chair, like he'd inherited the right to breathe in it. He leaned back, looked around my dining room at the crown molding I'd cut by hand, the blue willow plates Ruth had wrapped in newspaper every Christmas, and laughed. "How does it feel to be a loser?" My jaw locked so hard, I felt it in my molars. The pearl handle of Ruth's pie server bit into my palm. My daughter stared at her napkin. My grandson froze with a fork halfway to his mouth. I smiled and asked, "Then why did you forge my signature, Gavin?" Nobody touched their food after that. And the worst part wasn't the silence. It was what I found out next, why he needed my house so badly, and how close they'd already come to burying me without a funeral. If you've ever had family smile while they cut you open, stay with me, because this is the part people never believe until it happens to them. It didn't start with dinner. It started 6 weeks earlier, with a man in loafers standing by my mailbox, holding a clipboard, and squinting at my front porch, like he was pricing lumber. I was on my knees in the side garden, tying up tomato vines with butcher's twine, when he called, "Mr. Bennett?" Nobody who actually knew me ever sounded that formal at my gate. I stood up slow, wiping dirt onto the thigh of my jeans, and he said he was there to complete the exterior valuation. He glanced at the house, then down at his papers, then back at me. Parcel 14A, river-facing easement, main residence and carriage structure. I told him he had the wrong address. He frowned. "This is the Bennett property, isn't it?" Before I could answer, Gavin came around the side of the house, in one of his cashmere pullovers, smiling too quickly. "Hey Rick, sorry, we're running behind. I told your office not to come until next week." He put a hand on the appraiser's elbow, like they knew each other. That was the first moment something cold moved through me. Because Gavin shouldn't have known why a stranger was standing at my mailbox before the man said another word. Gavin had been in my life for 11 years by then, married to my daughter Lily for 8. He was the kind of man who never raised his voice because he didn't need to. He could make you feel small using nothing but politeness and a hand on your shoulder. He wore white sneakers that never seemed to touch dirt, called old houses assets, and used phrases like highest and best use while looking at places where people had grieved, healed, celebrated, or buried pets in the yard. I was a Finnish carpenter, 42 years. I built staircases that stopped groaning under people's feet. I repaired warped doors and widow frames and church pews. My hands had calluses where Gavin had opinions. Ruth used to say, I trusted too slowly with strangers and too fast with family. She was right both times. When Lily brought Gavin home the first time, he charmed Ruth in under 10 minutes. He carried dishes without being asked. He laughed at the right places. He remembered details. When Lily said they wanted to buy a little brick bungalow and couldn't afford the closing costs, I emptied a CD early and paid them. When Gavin's first cafe flooded 3 months before opening, I spent 19 days there for free, replacing the ruined baseboards and building shelves from salvaged oak. When Lily had trouble getting pregnant, Ruth and I wrote checks without keeping count. By the time Ruth died, I had already given them the sort of help you don't mention out loud, because counting your sacrifices to your own child feels vulgar. That was exactly why what came later hurt the way it did. After the man with the clipboard left, Gavin stood with his hands in his pockets and gave me a little half laugh. Just a mix-up. One of our financing people is sloppy. Our? I asked. He smiled wider. You know what I mean? I did know what he meant. Gavin always spoke as if the whole world had already agreed to whatever version of reality benefited him most. At dinner parties, he called me Old School Sam and told people I was the man who taught him patience, as if I were some charming relic he dusted off for company. But privately, he had started making comments about the house. Not direct offers, just little trims of the blade. This neighborhood's changing. That riverfront's going to explode in value. You can't maintain a place like this forever. Lily worries about you rattling around here alone. The concern was always polished. That was what made it uglier. Ruth and I bought the house in 1989 when nobody with money wanted this part of town. It had sagging porches, cracked plaster, and one bathroom that smelled permanently of iron and mildew. We restored it room by room, while Lily did homework on drop cloths. I built the walnut table in the dining room, The winter Ruth lost her hair during chemo the first time, because she wanted one piece in the house that felt solid enough to survive us both. The front door still had the original brass key, tied to a blue ribbon Ruth wrapped around it after Lily kept losing it in high school. That key lived in Ruth's recipe tin in the pantry whenever I wasn't using it. 3 days after the appraisal mix-up, I opened the pantry and found the tin turned backward. It sounds small now, but when you've lived in a house long enough, disorder talks. The sugar canister had been pushed half an inch to the left. The cinnamon jar was in front of the paprika instead of behind it, and the brass key with the blue ribbon was gone. I stood there with one hand on the pantry shelf and felt my skin go tight across my shoulders. I told myself there was an explanation. Lily had been over with Ben. Maybe he'd played with it. Maybe I'd left it in the desk drawer. But the desk drawer in the den was also unlocked, and I never left it that way. That drawer held my insurance papers, the deed copy, Ruth's death certificate, and the folder with the receipts from every major repair I'd ever made on the house. Not because I expected applause, because houses, like marriages, survive better when somebody keeps the records. Nothing looked stolen. That should have reassured me. It didn't. A week later, I found a certified letter in my trash can under coffee grounds and onion skins. The envelope had my name on it. It had been steamed open and resealed badly enough that the flap curled back at the corner. The return address was from First Harbor Bank. Inside was only a blank marketing insert. That's when I stopped telling myself I was imagining things. I drove to the post office where I'd worked for 30 years and asked Teresa Malloy, who still supervised the carriers, if she could tell me whether anything had been signed for at my address lately. Teresa had gone to high school with Ruth and still wore her reading glasses on a beaded chain that clicked softly against her chest when she walked. She didn't answer right away. She looked at me over the rims and said, "You want the official answer or the useful one?" "The useful one." She leaned in. 2 certified items in the last month, both signed by a person listed as authorized resident. Initials G.C. My throat went dry. Gavin Cross. I drove home with both hands clamped at 10 and 2, though there wasn't a soul on the road worth being careful for. I kept hearing Ruth's voice the way she sounded when Lily was 16 and lied about where she was sleeping over. Pay attention to the first lie, Sam. The second one always cost more. What made it harder was that life around the lies still looked normal. Lily still brought Ben over on Thursdays. Ben still left his sneakers by the mudroom bench and asked for grilled cheese cut in squares. Gavin still kissed Lily on the top of the head while scanning emails with the other hand. They still talked about school lotteries and soccer schedules and whether the dishwasher made a funny noise. Cruel people rarely arrive wearing black hats. Sometimes they arrive with your grandchild on their hip and a bottle of wine. Then I overheard something I wasn't meant to hear. It was raining that afternoon, the kind of cold spring rain that makes gutters chatter. Gavin was in the backyard, under the covered porch, pacing with his phone while I was in the workshop planing down a sticking cabinet door. The planer drowned most of it out, but when I shut it off, his voice came through the screen door. "No, not till we control the frontage." A pause. I know what the investors were promised. Another pause. He won't be a problem if Lily handles it. If she doesn't, I will. I stood so still I could hear water ticking off the gutters into the barrel by the fence. When Gavin came back inside, he found me at the sink washing sawdust off my hands. He smiled like nothing had happened. "You still keeping that old dehumidifier in the basement?" A buyer would call that a smell. A buyer, not if. A buyer. That night, I went into the den, pulled out the file drawer, and noticed something else missing. Not the deed copy. Not the insurance binder. Ruth's handwritten will summary. It had never been the legal document. Our attorney had the original. But Ruth liked keeping plain English notes clipped to important things, because she knew grief made people stupid with paperwork. Her summary had one line underlined twice in blue ink. "House remains solely Sam's, unless he chooses otherwise." That page was gone. That should have been enough for me to explode. Instead, I got quiet. Grief teaches you something about silence. Not the helpless kind. The watchful kind. The kind that lets other people keep talking until they tell you where the knife is. So, I said nothing. I changed the lock on the mailbox the next morning. I moved the recipe tin into the workshop cabinet behind my router bits. I made copies of every document in the den and put the originals in a fireproof bag in the trunk of my truck. And I called the county recorder's office. The woman who answered transferred me twice before a familiar voice came on the line. Marianne Flores had handled deed recordings in that office for almost 20 years before retiring. She and Ruth used to drink bad boxed Chardonnay on our back porch and complain about people who tiled over hardwood. When I told her my name, she said, "Sam, why do you sound like that?" "Like what?" "Like you've already figured out something you don't want confirmed." I asked if she could meet me for coffee. She arrived with a legal pad and the expression of a woman prepared to be disappointed in humanity but not surprised by it. I told her about the appraiser, the mail, the missing summary, the phone call, the key. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said, "Pull up the parcel database." We did. That was how I found the line of credit. First Harbor Bank, recorded against my property 3 months earlier, $180,000. My signature sat at the bottom of the scanned document, like a dead thing someone had dressed in my clothes. The notary stamp was from a UPS store across town. I'd never been inside. For a second, I couldn't hear the cafe around us. Not the grinder, not the door chime, not the girl steaming milk behind the counter, just the blood in my ears. Marianne pointed at the filing date. "Where were you that day?" I knew immediately. Children's emergency. Ben had split his chin open on a slide. Lily called me because Gavin was in a meeting, and I sat in a molded plastic chair for 4 hours while Ben slept against my arm after the stitches. I still had the parking receipt in my glove box. That was the moment I knew this wasn't pressure. It wasn't concern. It was a plan. And I still didn't know how far it went. I thought about confronting Lily first. I truly did. I sat in the truck outside her house for 10 full minutes, watching her porch light flicker in the rain, telling myself there had to be some explanation that didn't end with my daughter helping her husband rob me. Then Ben's backpack bumped past the front window, and I saw Lily kneel to zip his coat. She looked tired, in a way that wasn't about motherhood. Thin, pulled inward. When Gavin came into frame behind her, she flinched before he even touched her shoulder. I drove away. I wanted proof before I broke what was left of my family. The proof came faster than I expected. The next Sunday, Lily insisted on bringing dinner to my house. That alone was unusual. Sunday dinner had always been mine. Ever since Ruth died, I'd kept it going because rituals are the scaffolding grief lets you keep. Same table, same plates, same butter dish with the hairline crack, roast chicken if I had the energy, meatloaf if I didn't, Ben at the corner, because he liked reaching the salt first. Lily arrived with green beans almondine in a casserole dish I'd never seen before. Gavin brought a Pinot Noir that cost more than my monthly water bill and started opening drawers like he lived there. I watched him from the sink while basting the chicken. He checked the sideboard, then the desk, then the pantry. His smile never moved. That was when I knew he was looking for something specific and hadn't found it yet. Dinner started strained and got worse. Ben talked about a diorama for school. Lily kept smoothing her napkin. Gavin talked about riverfront development, boutique hospitality, walkability, tax abatements, all the soulless words men use when they want to make greed sound municipal. Then he set down his glass and said, "We should talk about what happens next, Sam. Not Dad, not even Mr. Bennett. Sam?" I cut another slice of chicken and asked, "What happens next with what?" "With the house." He said it lightly. "Lily and I have been worried. The stairs, the maintenance, you being alone. It's time to think practically." There it was. Practical. One of his favorite words. A blade wrapped in a napkin. I put the knife down. "I am thinking practically." He smiled. "Good, because I have a beautiful memory care community lined up 10 minutes away. Private courtyard, chef-prepared meals, medication management." Ben looked up. "Grandpa's not sick." Lily said too fast, "Sweetheart, eat your peas." I turned to my daughter. "Memory care?" She didn't meet my eyes. "Dad, please don't make this hard." The room changed temperature. I looked at the woman I had rocked through ear infections and algebra homework, and the week Ruth died, when Lily slept on our bedroom floor, because she couldn't stand the quiet in her own room. And now she was asking me not to make it hard. Not for me. For them. I asked, "How long have you been discussing this?" Gavin answered for her. "Long enough to know it's the right call." I laughed once. I couldn't help it. It wasn't amusement. It was the sound a man makes when the last board snaps under his feet. Then Gavin took a sip of wine, leaned back in Ruth's chair, and gave me the line I'll hear in my head until I die. "How does it feel to be a loser?" Lily whispered. "Gavin." But he was enjoying himself now. "Honestly, you spent your whole life fixing trim and saving receipts, and what do you have to show for it? An old house you can't maintain, and a family cleaning up after you." My hand closed around Ruth's pie server so hard the pearl handle pressed a crescent into my skin. I smiled, and I asked, "Then why did you forge my signature, Gavin?" It was almost funny, the way noise vanished. Even the refrigerator seemed to stop humming. Gavin's face didn't collapse. Men like him are too practiced for that. It twitched once. That was all. But Lily turned so sharply her water glass tipped and spilled across the tablecloth Ruth had embroidered with tiny blue vines 26 years ago. "I'm sorry?" Gavin said. I reached into my shirt pocket and laid the photocopy on the table. First Harbor Bank. $180,000. My forged signature at the bottom. And because I wanted him to know I'd done my homework, I placed the hospital parking receipt on top of it. "That was the day Ben got stitches," I said. "You remember? You were too busy to come." Lily stared at the page, like it was written in another language. "Gavin?" He didn't look at her. He looked at me. Then he gave a little shrug. "You authorized me to help with the financing structure. Verbal authorization is still authorization." "No," I said. "It isn't." He leaned forward. "You're confused." That word? Confused. He'd been building that word brick by brick, while I was still wondering why the recipe tin had moved. I turned to Lily. "Did you know?" Her lips parted, closed, opened again. "He told me it was paperwork related to the project. He said you agreed to leverage the equity temporarily, and that it would be paid back at closing." For one stupid, humiliating second, relief hit me. Because she hadn't known the full thing. Then the rest landed. She had still believed him over me. Gavin spread his hands. "See, this is exactly why we're having the conversation about care, paranoia, agitation, distortion," Ben said. Very small. "Dad, stop." I stood up so slowly, my chair legs barely scraped. "Dinner is over." Gavin didn't move. I leaned down until he had no choice but to look at me from inches away. "Get out of my wife's chair." That was the first time all night his eyes hardened openly. He rose. Lily started crying before they even reached the front hall. I thought that would be the low point. I was wrong. 2 mornings later, a county social worker rang my bell at 9:17 with a clipboard and a careful voice. She had received a request for an urgent welfare assessment. Allegations included cognitive decline, self-neglect, confusion with finances, paranoia regarding family members, and unsafe independent living. Attached to the request were sworn statements. One from Gavin, one from Lily. I read my daughter's signature 3 times before the words made sense. She mentioned the time I left the tea kettle on too long after Ruth's first death anniversary, the time I forgot Ben's soccer shin guards in my truck, the time I mixed up Tuesday and Wednesday during a week I had shingles and a fever. Each little ordinary human flaw had been stacked into evidence, like they were building a wall out of my most tired moments. The social worker walked through my house, while I stood there feeling flayed. She looked in the refrigerator, the medicine cabinet, the laundry room. She asked me who the president was and what month it was, and whether I ever heard Ruth's voice in the house. I told her, only when someone moves her things. She wrote that down. When she left, I sat on the back steps and stared at the dent Ruth's watering can had made in the porch board years ago. I kept seeing Lily's signature, not Gavin's, hers. That was the part that truly broke something in me. Not the money, not the fraud. My child helping him turned my grief into a diagnosis. Marianne called that afternoon and said, "You need to come over." She had printed everything she could legally access, and what she spread across her dining table made the forgery look almost small. There was the line of credit. There was the filed petition for temporary guardianship hearing, already set for the following Thursday. There were draft sale documents for my property, bundled into a larger development packet under the name Riverlight Hospitality Group. And there, clipped to the top, was a site rendering. My house was still on it. Only, it wasn't labeled as a home. It was labeled East Garden Guest Cottage. I stared at the little rectangle that had been my kitchen, my bed, Ruth's last week alive, Lily's growth chart in the pantry, Ben's train set under the radiator. Guest Cottage. Marianne tapped another page. Look here. It was a financing memo. Investor funds would release only if Gavin's company secured uninterrupted river frontage by the end of the month. My property was the missing piece. Without it, the entire project stalled. With it, he could pay off cost overruns he'd buried from 2 other failed renovations. So the loan was probably to keep the project alive long enough to grab your house and close. I sat down hard. Then she handed me the last document. A proposed care plan. Sunset Glen Memory Residence. Estimated monthly cost to be paid by liquidating real estate assets. There it was. The full shape of the trap. Forged debt against my house. Call me confused when I object. Use the guardianship petition to force me into care. Sell the house to pay for the care they invented. And all of it dressed up as family concern. The mystery was over. The truth was worse. I drove home in the dark and found Lily sitting on my porch. For one hopeful second, I thought she had come alone to tell me she was leaving him. Then I saw the packet in her lap. Sunset Glen brochures. "Dad," she said, getting up too fast, "please don't make this uglier than it has to be." I actually looked behind me, because that sentence could not possibly have been aimed at the man whose house they were trying to steal. But it was. She was crying. Real tears. That almost made it worse. He said, "If the hearing goes badly, the bank can call the loan and everything implodes. Ben could lose his school. We could lose our house." "Dad," he said, "the move would only be temporary until things calm down." I asked, very quietly. "And what exactly do you think calms down after a daughter signs papers saying her father has lost his mind?" She covered her mouth. I wanted to scream. Instead, I unlocked the door and went inside without inviting her. She followed me to the kitchen. I was scared. "So was I when your mother died. I didn't sell you." That landed. I saw it land. She folded in on herself like I'd struck her. Good. Not because I wanted to hurt her. Because sometimes pain is the only language left when love has been translated too many times. She left the brochures on the counter. I threw them in the trash after her taillights disappeared. An hour later, Ben called me from Lily's phone. He whispered, "Grandpa?" "Yeah, buddy. I think Dad's mad." My whole body tightened. "Are you safe?" "Yeah. But Grandpa, I found your blue key in Dad's desk." The room tilted. Did he say where he got it? No. He just said, "Some old things need new owners." After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen staring at the dark window over the sink, and that was the exact moment I stopped hoping this could be solved privately. The next morning, I called an attorney. Not a shark. Not some television performance man. I called Helen Cho, a probate lawyer Ruth and I had used when we updated our estate documents after her diagnosis. Helen was calm in a way that felt expensive and merciless. She listened for 15 minutes and said, "Do not speak to Gavin again without witnesses or a recording. Do not leave the house voluntarily. And Sam, we're not treating this like a family misunderstanding. We're treating it like fraud and attempted coercive control." Hearing someone say it plain steadied me more than sympathy would have. Over the next 4 days, my life became paper, timestamps, and strategy. Helen filed objections to the guardianship petition and an emergency challenge to the loan. Marianne found the notary, who admitted no such signing had occurred in her presence, and that her stamp number had been copied from a prior transaction. Teresa from the post office printed the delivery scans showing Gavin had intercepted my mail. I dug the children's emergency discharge papers from Ben's chin stitches out of an old file box. Then something happened I didn't expect. Gavin called me himself. He sounded almost bored. "You're making a simple transition unnecessarily hostile." I put him on speaker and hit record. "There's nothing simple about identity fraud." He gave a thin laugh. "You keep using dramatic words because you know the practical argument isn't on your side." "The practical argument where you steal an old man's house?" "The practical argument," he said, voice flattening, "where a widower in decline stops pretending a 4-bedroom riverfront property is a shrine. You're not preserving memory, Sam. You're clogging value." There it was again. Value. Not home, not family. Value, I said. "And if I don't go?" A pause. Then, with absolute confidence, he answered, "Then a judge sends you somewhere with locked doors and supervised medication, and the house gets sold anyway. Try not to make Ben watch." I didn't speak for 3 full seconds. He mistook it for fear. "Thought so," he said, and hung up. That recording changed everything, but not as much as what came the next night. A little after 11, headlights rolled slowly across my living room wall. I looked out and saw Lily's car. She got out barefoot, still in the wrinkled clothes she'd worn to dinner at someone else's house, clutching her phone like it was hot. When I opened the door, she burst into tears so hard she couldn't talk. I didn't touch her. I couldn't. Not yet. She finally held up the phone and said, "I recorded him." Gavin had been in the garage on a call with one of his investors. He didn't know Lily was in the mudroom with Ben's soccer bag. The recording was clear enough to make me feel sick. "I don't care if she gets sentimental," Gavin said through the speaker. "Once the petition sticks, Sam's out. The parcel closes Friday. If Lily has a meltdown, I'll tell her it's for her own good. That line always works." Then a man's voice asked, "And the daughter?" Gavin laughed. "The daughter signs what's put in front of her." Lily stopped the recording there because she started shaking too hard to hold the phone. That was the moment my daughter finally saw the whole shape of her own marriage. Not the sharpness, not the ambition, the contempt. She sat at my kitchen table under the yellow pendant Ruth picked out in 1997 and told me everything Gavin had hidden. The second mortgage on their own house, the maxed cards in Lily's name, the investor he'd lied to about permitting, the pressure, the monitoring, the way every disagreement became proof she was too emotional to understand scale. Then she said the sentence that let me know some honesty had finally survived in her. "I knew he was selfish. I didn't know he was willing to erase you." I believed her. I also didn't let her off the hook. "You helped him." She nodded and cried harder. "I know. There are injuries apology does not heal on contact. It only proves the wound was real." So I told her the truth. If you want to help now, you don't get to help by feeling bad. You help by telling the truth where it costs you. She wiped her face. "Tell me what to do." What I told her to do was simple. Come to the Planning Commission hearing on Friday. Bring every document with her signature Gavin had pushed across a counter. Bring the recording. And when the time came, speak before I did. Friday arrived hot and bright. Insulting weather for the week I'd had. The hearing was held in the old City Hall chamber with its cheap microphones and varnished benches. Gavin had turned it into a show. He wore a navy suit. His investors sat in the second row with glossy renderings in leather folders. A local lifestyle reporter was there because Riverlight had been pitched as heritage redevelopment with community impact. There were neighbors, board members, a banker from First Harbor, Helen, Marianne, Lily, and me. I wore the brown sport coat Ruth loved because it made me look, in her words, like a man who could fix a government if they'd just bring him the right screwdriver. Gavin opened with slides. River views, boutique suites, event lawn, restored carriage charm. He used the phrase family legacy twice, while a rendering of my house glowed on the screen behind him. East Garden Guest Cottage. I watched the board members nod along. I watched the investor on the aisle check his phone. I watched Gavin smile, that patient, civic smile of his. Then the chair opened public comment. Lily stood first. You could feel the room change because half the people there knew her as Gavin's polished wife. the one who chaired school fundraisers and posted family photos in neutral-colored sweaters. She walked to the microphone, pale and shaking, but her voice held. "My name is Lily Cross. My father is Sam Bennett, and the application before this board falsely represents control of property my father never agreed to sell." Gavin's head turned slowly. She kept going. "I signed statements in support of a guardianship petition against him. Those statements were misleading, incomplete, and made under pressure from my husband, who told me my father had approved financial arrangements I now know were based on forged documents." The investor on the aisle stopped checking his phone. One of the board members leaned forward. "Miss Cross, are you alleging fraud related to Parcel 14A? "I'm not alleging it," she said, and for the first time in weeks I heard steel in my daughter's voice. "I'm bringing you proof." She handed the clerk a packet Helen had prepared. Gavin stood up. "This is inappropriate. This forum is not for domestic disputes." That was my cue. I walked to the second microphone with the original brass key in my pocket, because Lily had found it that morning in Gavin's desk, and put it in my palm without a word. "My name is Sam Bennett," I said. "I built the house labeled East Garden Guest Cottage when the man presenting these slides was in middle school. It is not a guest cottage, it is my home. And the reason he is in a hurry today is not civic pride. It's because his financing depends on pretending he controls land he tried to steal." You could hear every chair creak. Helen stood and asked the clerk to play the audio. Gavin moved fast then. "Don't. Too late." His own voice filled the chamber. "Once the petition sticks, Sam's out. The parcel closes Friday." No one moved. No one even coughed. Then came the second recording. His phone call with me. "A judge sends you somewhere with locked doors. The house gets sold anyway." When it ended, Gavin looked around the room the way trapped men do, recalculating which version of charm might still work. He chose outrage. "This is edited. This is a coordinated smear by a vindictive old man and a hysterical wife." The banker from First Harbor stood up before he could finish. "Mr. Cross, the bank has already placed an internal fraud hold on the credit line tied to Parcel 14A pending law enforcement review. We are also notifying your investors that any representation of site control, including that parcel, is materially false." That was the first crack in the public version of him. The second came from the investor on the aisle, a gray-haired man with perfect cufflinks, who didn't even try to hide his disgust. "You told us title was clean." Gavin spread his hands. "This is a temporary family dispute being weaponized." Marianne rose from the bench behind me and said, loud and clear, "The notary stamp on the recorded instrument is fraudulent. I have submitted the documentation." Now the room was no longer his. The chair of the commission looked down over his glasses and said, "Given the evidence presented, this board cannot consider any application relying on disputed ownership or control of Parcel 14A. The Riverlight submission is suspended, pending legal resolution." Gavin stepped toward Lily then, not me. That was what told me he was finished. Men like him always go after the person they still think they can control. He hissed, "Do you understand what you've done?" Lily stepped back, but she didn't fold. "Yes," she said, "I stopped helping you." And because justice sometimes arrives, not like thunder, but like timing, two plainclothes detectives who had been waiting by the side wall approached at that exact moment with a uniformed officer behind them. "Mr. Cross," one said, "we need to speak with you regarding a fraud complaint and evidence of forged instruments." Gavin looked at me then, really looked at me, not as scenery, not as an obstacle, as the man who had finally made him answer to reality. His face changed in a way I'll never forget. Not guilt, not shame, astonishment, as if it had honestly never occurred to him that I might fight back. He said, low enough that only I heard it, "You just blew up your daughter's life." I took the brass key from my pocket and closed my hand around it. "No," I said, "you did. I just turned on the lights." They walked him out past his investors, past the reporter, past the blown-up renderings of a future he'd built out of other people's walls. And that should have been the end. It wasn't. The fallout took months, but the direction changed in a single afternoon. The guardianship petition was withdrawn and then dismissed with prejudice. The bank voided the forged line of credit. One investor sued Gavin's company. Another pulled out so fast, the whole project collapsed before summer. Lily filed for divorce 3 weeks later after learning he had also opened 2 accounts in Ben's name. She moved into a rental across town and started working again, this time with passwords he didn't know and a lawyer who did not flinch. We did not become magically healed because he was gone. That only happens in stories told by people who have never had to sit across from betrayal at a kitchen table. For a while, Lily and I spoke mostly about Ben, pickup times, school forms, whether he still liked the dinosaur pasta I used to make him. Apology, when it's real, works slowly. It shows up on time. It tells the truth even when the truth humiliates you. It does not demand immediate absolution as a reward for finally behaving decently. Lily learned that. So did I. The first time she came back for Sunday dinner, after Gavin was out on bail, she stopped in the doorway of the dining room and started crying before she sat down. Ruth's chair was empty. I had left it that way on purpose, not as punishment, as clarity. Ben climbed into his usual corner seat, asked for extra gravy, and launched into a 7-minute explanation of why octopuses were smarter than people in several measurable ways. It was the most normal sound I had heard in months. Halfway through dinner, Lily touched the table with her fingertips and whispered, "I used to think this house made me feel guilty because it held so much history. I think it was making him feel small because it held so much truth." That was one of the first honest things she said after the collapse. I nodded. Truth does that. By fall, the city classified the house under a local preservation program Marianne bullied me into applying for. Helen helped me update every legal document I owned, not because I planned to die tomorrow, because love without boundaries had nearly cost me the one thing Ruth and I built together. I also changed the locks. All of them, not just on the doors, on my habits. On the way, I confused sacrifice with safety. On the way, I mistook being needed for being loved. Ben still comes Thursdays. He still drops his sneakers by the mudroom bench. Sometimes he helps me in the workshop sanding little blocks of scrap maple while telling me what happened at school. Sometimes Lily stays for coffee and we manage something close to peace. Not the old peace. That one is gone. The new kind. The earned kind. The kind that doesn't require pretending. A month after the hearing, I found Ruth's missing will summary tucked inside an architecture magazine Gavin had left in the den. Folded once, underlined twice. House remains solely Sam's, unless he chooses otherwise. He had taken it because even he understood the danger of plain language. I framed that page and put it in the back of the pantry door where only family sees it. Real family, I've learned, are the people who protect your dignity when it's inconvenient, not the ones who invoke love while pricing your square footage. As for Gavin, last I heard he was negotiating pleas and blaming everyone else in the room, which sounded exactly right. Men like him don't run out of excuses, they run out of witnesses willing to nod. And me? The night the last paperwork cleared, I walked through the house alone with all the lights off, except the lamp over Ruth's chair. The floorboards clicked softly under my feet. The refrigerator hummed. The hydrangeas brushed the porch rail in the wind. Every sound was familiar enough to hurt, and gentle enough to heal. I checked the back door, the den window, the pantry. Then I took the old brass key, with the faded blue ribbon, slid it into the front lock, and turned it. For the first time in a very long while, I wasn't protecting a house from strangers. I was protecting it from the people who had mistaken my patience for surrender. And when the deadbolt settled into place, the whole old place gave one quiet wooden sigh, like Ruth herself, approving from somewhere just beyond the walls. This time, I heard her clearly.